magic of the soul in writing. Dina Miriam in conversation with Sudha Prabhu. And we will be talking about her book, When the Bright Moon Rises. Before we start, I will introduce Dina and Sudha. Just give me a while as I turn the pages. Yes. Dina Miriam began work in the interfaith movement in 1990s as the vice chair of the Millennium World Peace Summit of Religious Leaders held at the UN in 2000. She is the founder of the Global Peace Initiative of Women. For over 40 years, she has been a student of Paramhamsa Yogananda and a meditation practitioner. She received her MA from Columbia University. In 2014, she received the Nivano Peace Prize for her interfaith peace efforts. Her books include My Journey Through Time and When the Bright Moon Rises, among others. And Dina will be in conversation with Sudha. We all know Sudha, the rock star of this festival, and she does not need an introduction, but I'm very honored to introduce her. Sorry. Yeah, please just give me a moment. I think it is here. Is it in the moderators?
Yes, it's in the moderators. Okay. It's probably the second last or the third last.
Yes. Sudha Prabhu is a corporate HR professional, and she now pursues a path close to her heart, making a difference with her work, be it through writing poems, artwork that has a soulful quality, and as a coach, therapist working with trauma and transition. Over to you, Sudha.
Thank you so much, Jilam, for that. And Dina, it's a privilege to have this conversation, which is also the concluding session of the Auroville LitFest of the 2.5 days that we have. Dina and myself also have an association because of Auroville, which is part of the International Advisory Council. And this year in February, we together organized the International Spiritual Summit. And somehow it just feels beautiful that today's session When the Bright Moon Rises, the awakening of ancient memories, is our talk. Welcome, Dina.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So, Dina, my question to you is this concept of awakening ancient memories. For me, I personally found it very intriguing. What inspired you to explore this theme? What went behind it? What was the journey like? How did you weave the structure, the concept? And what was the intent or what was the calling behind this book?
I have to go back a little bit to answer that. A number of years ago, I began having very vivid memories of my past birth, and then the birth before that, and then the birth before that. And I began writing them down, checking myself out, sort of like an investigator, is this true or am I delusional? And in each case, the memories were stimulated by the meeting of a person. And so I wrote that book, My Journey Through Time, a memoir of life, death, and rebirth. And I really wrote it for myself to see the patterns that would emerge, because I've had a lifelong interest in understanding karma, cause and effect, because it determines our life. So to understand our relationships, our work, everything about ourselves, we have to really know something about this law. So I was encouraged to publish that book, and I did, and I thought that was the end of it. I didn't expect to write another book because I got to see beautiful patterns emerge of how one life weaves into the next, and then it all made sense. And then a few years later, I took a pilgrimage to Ayodhya and then Vaishno Devi. Out of that came the book, The Untold Story of Sita. And I had to question myself this time. I'm going back thousands of years. Was I the servant in that book, or was I channeling the servant? I couldn't answer that question. It felt to me like I'd lived that life that I wrote about in that book, but I still can't answer the question. Am I channeling a soul, or was that my personal experience? Everyone has to judge for themselves. To me, it felt like my personal experience. I wrote that book, and I didn't expect to write another book. And then I was in Varanasi, and went to the Kashi Vishwanath temple at dawn. And there I had an experience that took me way back in time. And I always run with my experiences and see what will emerge. So I started seeing a story emerge, and I started writing about it. And again, was I that young girl in the forest community that was coming into the new society that was forming, or was I channeling someone? So and then I had a dream, the dream which was a beautiful one of those vision dreams of the marriage between a deity of the moon and the sun. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, so there really is a deity of the moon and the sun. And this opened up my whole reflection about the second part of the book, which is in Tang, China, where this young woman is a devotee of the moon goddess. So it was an experience for me, a very profound experience, the writing of that book. I came in contact with sages. The memories were very real to me. I call them memories. Somebody else might call them imaginings. To me, they were very real memories of experiences that were deeply felt, and learnings. Because what I saw was that as that young girl, living during the Vedic times, didn't really understand the depth of the wisdom that was being expressed. But now, thousands of years later, I have a much deeper understanding. And I've always wanted to penetrate the mysteries of the Veda. Mm-hmm. And tried to, when I was younger, to read the Vedas, and didn't get very far. And so while I was writing the book, I turned to Sri Aurobindo, saying, okay, let me see these things that I'm hearing and seeing, these teachings on Saraswati Devi and Indra Devi. Let me try to understand them. So I had Sri Aurobindo as my companion as I was writing the book, and he gave me insight into what I was seeing and hearing.
So a couple of beautiful lines and images that you brought. One was the concept of channeling and listening to it and opening. What is that experience like when you say channeling and opening into it and then bringing it in the form of words and a concept? The second that you mentioned about understanding. What is this nature of understanding that you're talking about, and how has that helped you in your own personal journey and as such even for others?
Well, in terms of channeling, I actually see what I write. Mm-hmm. And I actually am back there in time. So I'm in the experience, I'm seeing and hearing. So often I say that I'm just a scribe. I'm recording what I'm hearing. And so there's some connection whether it's my memory that I'm connecting to or another being is speaking through me. I'm definitely recording the experiences that I'm having, both visually and audibly. And in terms of understanding, we've all sort of grown up with this concept of Indra as being this sort of, human-like deity, irascible and, creating mischief and things like that, and proud and all that. Well, as I got into the book and started writing about Indra, I fell in love with him. I fell in love with this cosmic power that we somehow put into the form of a human, but really not. And that's when I turned to Sri Aurobindo to understand the mind, the higher mind. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself relating to Indra, even experiencing the presence of Indra. And then this whole question, which is very hard, and this is what I grappled with, because I do have a 21st century rational mind, and I grappled with this throughout the book. I'm seeing and relating to this goddess of the moon. Now, I know that I had many lifetimes of worshiping the goddess of the moon. A book I've just finished, which takes place in Tibet, we calls this also this relationship with the goddess of the moon. But what does that mean? What is the goddess of the moon? Certainly not that moon that's sitting out there circling around. what are these deities? So it led me into a whole reflection of the cosmic forces that we call the deities. And it changed my thinking about it. That's why I say the book had a profound effect on me in terms of how I relate to the deities, who we think of as in a personal relationship, and yet they also have this impersonal role in the cosmos in terms of awakening us to the ultimate reality. And so in this book, it was really the relationship with Indradev, the relationship with Saraswati, who I didn't know before, but I came to know Saraswati because the first part of the book during the Vedic time, there are the poets who are drawing out. They're so deeply connected to Saraswati Devi that they're drawing out these profound poems. And then many thousands of years later, I find myself in Tang, China as a woman poet, an unknown woman poet, married to a very now well-known poet, and I began writing poetry. Now, I was a poet as a young college student, but I hadn't written poetry in many, many years. I started writing poetry again. You know, I'd finish a chapter and just write poetry, and so it was a very interesting. And again, it showed me how these karmic seeds, these personalities that we were, remain within us in subtle ways, and we can draw upon them. That tongue poet still lives within me in some way. I'm not meant to be a poet in this life. That's not my calling. But there are elements of that personality that is still within me.
So this whole idea of intertwining the past and the present, because there is an identity of Dana who has taken this identity that we see in front of us, but there is also this whole past memories that is being awakened in you, which culturally, socially, is very different from what you've been born into or been raised into or even probably believed into. How has this journey been of balancing something? Because you mentioned about worshipping of deities, which is somewhere a very Eastern mysticism kind of response compared to a Western one. So how has that journey been like? And if you could share a little bit more about the significance of this opening into, if I can use the word, collective consciousness or the unconscious consciousness, its significance not just for your own evolution, but what needs to happen for us to also bring that. So is there an impact? And if yes, what's that impact?
When I wrote my first book, I go back, I think 6 lives. I actually, you know, and it was over a span of several years. I actually relived each one, went through the sorrow, and went through the joy. In each one, there was some illumined figure who tried to point me in a certain direction toward the divine. But I saw progressively how I gained an understanding at an earlier stages, not understanding what was being taught to me, but gradually over the period of centuries. And at the end of the book, I write a poem that is, who am I? Am I that, you know, Russian emigre? Am I that Southern belle? Am I that African forest dweller? You know, the Rani, the poor Sufi? Who am I? And, you know, I've had so many different personalities. And I lived them all, and I now remember some of them. Of course, you know, we have thousands of lives. You know, I remember a handful. But it opens to the profound question of who am I? And at the end of the poem, I say, I'm all of them and none of them. You know, there are parts of each one that still remain within me, because there was something gained, some learning gained from that experience. And I came to see that karma is not a system of punishment and reward. That is a falsity. It's a process of awakening. The whole system was emerged to help us awaken, and everything that comes to us is for that reason. And we are the drivers of our own ship. We set it in motion and decide how it's going to unfold, not on a conscious level, but an unconscious level, all for the process of awakening. So those two things, realizing that we determine our course, not consciously at the soul level, and that we just go through these experiences to help us gain the qualities and learnings that we need to take the next step in our soul journey. So what the effect of all this has had on me was to realize that I've been all of these personalities, and yet essentially I'm none of them. And it's like it sort of weakened my identity to my current personality. This is just another one of those. I mean, I can't claim to be Dina any more than I can claim to be that one or that one. This is how I'm manifesting at this moment. But interestingly, I'm in the middle of another book called Memories of a Future Life, which projects 200 years into the future. And again, I'm living that life as I'm writing it. And I'm saying to myself, this is crazy. I'm writing my script now. I'm doing it consciously, not unconsciously. Most of us do it unconsciously, by the things that we do. We have to know by the things that our thinking and our behavior in this life, we're writing our script. So, I decided to try to do this consciously. And, you look at the law of probability and see how certain things are likely to unfold. It's not written in stone, but they could unfold in this way. So it's an interesting process. So I've learned from seeing the past how one life feeds into the next. You can then project that into the future. So this has been a major part of my sadhana, because as I said, from a young woman, I really want to understand this law of cause and effect. Without knowing that, we're just sort of tossed around, not understanding why the things that come, why are we born this way instead of that way, in these conditions and not in those conditions? Why do we have these challenges when other people don't? So if you go back in time, you see that it's a beautiful mural, a grand mosaic, and it makes perfect sense, and it is stunning. The way the universe works and how the lives weave together. And ultimately, it's like in a play, I mean, if you love an actor and you follow that actor and you see that actor in different roles, well, you recognize the actor and you recognize the actor has certain qualities. They do things in a certain way, but they're playing a different part, and they have to be true to that part. So I see our life very much like that, and it helps create a certain it's about a certain dispassion in your life where you can step back and not take it all quite so seriously.
Beautiful. I'm just going to read a certain paragraph from your book, which seems to have touching just the theme that you spoke about. This is page 117. He nodded. It was not time for you to remember. There are other reasons for me to take birth so soon. Aren't there, Satya? He nodded. There is a great cultural flourishing. Your creative side will find expression in this life. The Vedas inspired in you a love for poetry, and in your last birth, this love was reawakened, and now it will find greater fulfillment. It is not only for Sachit that you're taking birth. One has to experience human love, its joy and its limitations, in order to transcend it, to expand that love so it's not limited to only one. To know that love is not an emotion, but a state of being. To transcend human love, I repeat it. You are right, Satya. I have not experienced human love in a long time, and the yearning is still there. Talk to me, what was this all about, Anna?
Well, that's been a theme throughout my books. Human love. Because human love causes us joy and pain. And even if it is the fulfillment of, that rare thing where you've worked through a lot of issues and a couple is in harmony, you still have the pain of death and separation and loss. So there's no human love without loss, without going through some element of the pain of separation. In the higher love, there is no separation. There's no loss because there's no separation. It's unconditional. There's no need. There's no wanting. There's no desire. It's that pure universal love. And in many of my books, and I see through many lifetimes, we all have to go through in our lives relationships. That's part of the human experience. There's family, there's work, there's relationships, the love relationships. And it's rare that we have that beautiful human love that can reflect the higher divine love. It's a rare thing, but it does come to all of us at one time or another. This woman, whether we call her Sundari or her tongue name, doesn't find it. She has this relationship with the poet Libai, who was Sachet in his previous birth. But there's a lot of sadness in that relationship as well. And again, I guess the teaching for me was that as long as there is that desire to experience love in the human realm, we'll keep seeking it. But there has to be also that knowledge that it's not the ultimate. It's not what's going to bring us to that higher state of joy that is really the deeper yearning of the soul, that pure love. And I think when in each of my books, there are experiences with a sage. In this case, it was Gayatri, reborn as Shifu, where you experience that higher state of love. But it's not in the romantic sense. It's this love of pure giving and pure being. It's hard to find the words to define that love. But when you've tasted it, you can compare and see that that's really what the soul yearns for and will not be satisfied with anything less. Even knowing that, we still go through our pursuits until we've exhausted them. So we go through lifetime after lifetime trying to find that perfect love in the human realm. And sometimes we're more successful than others. And yet, until we finally realize that we want to become love, we want to be love, we want to be in a state of love. Not be in love, but be love. And so not be yearning and hearkening after another human being, because we all are in our stages of learning and have our flaws and shortcomings, but to seek that higher, pure, universal love. And so we get different chances to do this. And so Sundari, when she was born as Shu, she gets another chance. I think she does a bit better in that life. She's learned a few things along the way. And at the end, she comes to peace with this being who's reborn as Libai. They have their experience of a union, and she makes peace with it. And that desire from long ago is fulfilled. And yet, it's not the end of the story. She's got to keep going, keep being reborn until she finds the connection to the higher love.
So on one side, you had quite a bit of memories that happened to you where you went lifetimes and that in a way supported your journey on the spiritual path. There may be many who don't have access to these memories and they go through life just like the way most probably of us are. What is that transition point, or how does one develop this capacity? Is it inherent? Is it dormant? Or is it something that can happen? And how does one nurture it? Because you mentioned about Sri Aurobindo being your companion on this journey. So my question is that most people see awakening experiences or being open to it as, I don't know, terrifying, uncomfortable, not know how to deal with it, is it even worth engaging it? And they would rather go through life in this way that we are accustomed to. So what's the significance of that? How does one really develop the capacity for it? And how does one hold the space for it and nurture it? And to allow that to happen, because then we access higher dimensions of what you just mentioned now.
I think a lot of people, especially if you watch children, children carry a lot of qualities from their past birth. I saw that with my own children when they're very young. And then they have to submerge them in order to face what this new opportunity is giving them. So I think that we come into this life, many people have fleeting glances of it or show qualities of their past birth that an astute parent can see, but then they have to submerge them. I don't encourage people to dig. I say whatever comes to you, be grateful, but if you go digging, it could be painful. I mean, this experience, my first experience when I began to recall my last birth was destabilizing. I have to say, it was very destabilizing. I really couldn't talk to anybody about it. I mean, I'm divorced, but I was married to a psychiatrist. So it's not that I just accept everything that comes to me. I had to say to myself, Dina, is this real? And that's why I went to certain places. I saw myself taking birth in Russia. I went to Russia to see if my visions, I could find the place I had seen. I went to Europe to see the place I had died. I remembered the Nazis marching into Prague just before I died. I went to there to see, because I feel that I have a Western mind and I've got to check it out. So I don't encourage people to dig, because it is a lot of, why are you reliving what you've already lived? I think many people, if you examine your life, because I've had people write to me and say how their book opened memories for them, particularly my first book, My Journey Through Time, because it's very concrete, going back one life, then another. It's opened memories, but not that they have relived them. I sometimes wonder if I've had to relive these episodes so that I could share it with the world. And I've had people here in the West, initially when I published my first book, My Journey Through Time, I had a few close friends. A friend of mine was dying, and she asked to read it, and she was a Jewish woman who had just started meditating, and she's the one who encouraged me to publish it. And it gave her a lot of peace as she approached her death, because she knew it wasn't the end. That's when I decided to publish it. But I shared it with a few spiritual friends who said, Dina, you can't publish this under your name. And I said, but it's my life. How can I not publish it under my name? And I decided to do it. And then I was working in the interfaith world, and I got a few calls from a Catholic priest that I knew and another Christian theologian, and they wanted to talk to me. They'd read the book, and I thought, okay, now I'm in for it. They're going to think I'm a woo-woo. But they told me how real it was for them, and how it changed their thinking. And one of them showed me all of these books, that scientific books on all the research being done, and said this is irrefutable now. This has now become a science, because there's so many studies of children who have memories where they go to the place and they tell them, whatever. And I read some of those books. I had never researched this, because to me it was not a matter do you believe or don't believe. It's a matter of this is my life. I see Dina as just one chapter in a long life. So now it changed my whole perception of myself as an actor having all these different parts. And I'm here doing this now, but in a short while I'll be somewhere else doing something else. And so I realized that, well, I say to people, don't dig, but accept what comes to you. Mm-hmm. And the only important thing is to reflect on your life, because you can tell a lot by reflecting on your life. If you're in a relationship that is causing you trouble, look deeply into it. If you're having issues with what work to do or with your work, look deeply into it. What are the causes of this? If you're having family problems, what are the relationships that you really want to resolve in this life? Because if you don't resolve them, you'll have to resolve them in the future. I think that's the key point to know. What you don't resolve now, you'll resolve in the future. What you don't achieve now, you'll achieve in the future. So there's both comfort in that, but also the question of, well, why not do it now? Why have to go through another round? And I made an effort. I had a difficult relationship with my mother, but knowing this, I resolved to not only make peace with her, but to cultivate a loving relationship with her at the end of her life. And I ended up taking care of her in her last few years. And it was a beautiful ending to a troubled relationship. And I had prayed for so long for a resolution, but it wasn't until I saw that I would have to deal with this in the future if I didn't deal with it now, that I really made the resolve. So I think more than remembering specifics of the past, if we reflect on our life objectively and really look at what we're being called to do now, what are the opportunities being given to us that we can address, then that's the purpose of this whole thing.
Thank you. There's another part that called me when I was reading the book, page 235. You talk about the marriage of the deities, and then you move on to this question that do the deities really marry? And then there is a mention that we may call it marriage, but they call it something else. Whatever we name it, there's a deep exchange of love, and that love extends to the entire universe. That's what sustains us. But the intriguing question over here is that real or our imagination? Why do you think that imagination is not real? I shrugged my shoulders. It says, the imagination is the doorway to the inner worlds, to the worlds of the celestials. Never shut that door. Those who do only see what is right in front of them and nothing beyond. How much for you has this been the imagination and the real? Because on one hand, we have an imaginative mind, but we're also talked about to question that imagination. Is that real? And somewhere along the line, imagination shuts off. And there is also the nature of the doubting mind. Can this really be true? Am I imagining? Am I hallucinating? How has the nature of mind and Sri Aurobindo's teachings and your own journey has helped you to navigate this? Is it imagination? Is it reality? And why can't imagination be real? And how does one really ascertain or dialogue this transition, this threshold?
Well, I have to say, I'm still in the process of sorting this out. And we have the rational questioning mind, which is useful to navigate the world. We have the intuitive mind. And the intuitive mind gives us access to information that the rational mind can't access. So the rational mind helps us to access and organize things about the material universe, to navigate a material life. The intuitive mind enables us to access spiritual realities that the rational mind can't access. And I think in the higher yugas, as Sri Aurobindo says, it was the intuitive age when the intuitive faculty was much more developed. And over time, as the rational mind became predominant, the intuitive mind sort of lost its muscle. We began to use it less. You don't use something, the muscle weakens, right? In creative people and poets and artists, their intuitive mind is still at work. That's how they access these truths. And so I think part of the challenge of our civilization now, and this was in part that behind that meeting we had on science and spirituality, how do we balance these two? Mm-hmm. And I think one does have to be, there is a role for the rational mind, because there are people, there are channelers who are just, it doesn't ring true. And I always test myself, and I say, if it's generating more love, if it's really bringing greater well-being, I have to have faith in the truth of what I'm seeing. If it's not being done in a self-serving way, because it can be, in the book I just finished, To Dance with Dakinis, which takes place in Tibet, there's an example of a powerful man gone rogue who's misused his powers. And we have all kinds of instances of that in olden times and today in the world of people who misuse their powers. So discrimination is needed. That's the third key. You have the rational mind, you have the intuitive, the imaginative mind. A balance is needed in order to navigate the material and spiritual universes. And you need discrimination, discernment, so that you know that what's coming through you, what you're perceiving, is based on truth. Because there are all kinds of deceptions out there, and it's a tricky thing. And when I wrote that about the marriage, I still have a strong questioning part of myself, a rational mind, that says, really? There's a deity of the sun and there's a deity of the moon, and they marry? Really? That's the rational mind.
Yeah.
But the intuitive mind says, somehow that is real. And it's not as our limited mind. We have such a limited vehicle in the human mind. And when the consciousness expands, awakens into a more elevated, inclusive state, then you can understand it. But to express it within language, to express it within rational terms, is quite a challenge. It's difficult to do. I'd say almost impossible. And so I've come to to me, it's all about relationship. I've come to be in relationship with those powers of the moon that we call the deities, and the powers of the sun, and know that there is a love relationship, a love exchange that goes on, that keeps it all in motion. And I think that over the next coming centuries, because my focus has turned from the past to the future now, I think it's important for all of us to begin to create a vision of the future, because we create the future. We collectively will create a dystopian future or a more beautiful future. So let's start on that process now. But I think we will see over the coming centuries a coming together of science and spirituality. So there will be an intuitive science that integrates, that allows intuitive insight to guide scientific discovery, rather than show me the numbers, the figures, the mathematical equations, that allows for a joining of these faculties.
So you mentioned about the sun and the moon. Is there a relationship to an internal world while there is a sun and moon outside? And if so, what's the reason you chose these two as a symbolism in this book? And especially emphasizing the role of the moon more so.
Well, definitely, when we talk about the deities, we're talking about the internal world. Of course, the external world is a projection of the internal world. So, and I think that will become a common theorem of science. There already is, talking about the material universe as a holographic projection of what we might call the energy verse, the internal world out of which everything comes. So there are, why did I choose the moon? Well, I think the moon chose me. And I think it's because I've had lifetimes worshiping the deity of the moon. There's not one deity of the moon. There are powers of the moon. And the moon in my past, as the sun has, I coming out of the Vedic tradition, the sun, the solar deities have played an important role. Even the book I wrote after this, Rukmini and the Turning of Time, where we talk about Krishna, was of the lunar dynasty. So what does that mean, that he was of the lunar dynasty? There was some relationship, the powers of the moon helped to fed in that dynasty into which he was born for a particular purpose. It was about to be eradicated through a great war, and he had to reseed it. So we all of us have our relationships with these stellar systems and planets. Everything is in relationship to everything else. The universe functions on relationship. That's the basis of the universe, is relationship. And so how can we think that we're outside of that system? We're in relationship with everything. And so this book, When the Bright Moon Rises, is really my coming to understand where I am at this vantage point in my soul's journey, what that relationship has meant to me in the past, that relationship with the moon deity. And it's interesting because often I afterwards I look back and reflect at what I've written and say, aha, so what is this about? What's the deeper meaning? It was India, a life in India, and then a life in China. China is definitely, there was a lot of worship of we have to look further back to ancient China to find the wisdom of that tradition. And I no longer see China of this very short political system they have now, less than 100 years. In the book, there's an encounter with a great Taoist sage. And that had great influence because I recognized the Taoist part of myself, the Taoist that still lives within me. I didn't know anything about Taoism, but writing this book, I became a Taoist, because I saw back then, there were no religions. There was just Sanatana Dharma, there was eternal truth. And whether you saw it through the lens of a Taoist, or a Bonpo in Tibet, or a Vedic Rishi, or someone else, there was that wisdom streaming through, expressed in different language, because the divine is the ultimate poet. The divine expresses things in such diversity, continually finding new ways to express the ultimate truth. And so I was so really gratified to find myself in the Taoist world and seeing the linkage with my Vedic past, and in the hope that this can seed something for the future, because it will seed something in the future. China will evolve beyond what it is now. Tibet will evolve into a new stage. India is evolving. And these three great cultures will evolve together into a beautiful harmony. Whether it's 200 years or 400 years, we don't know. The only thing we can't figure out is the timing. But we can see that an awakening is taking place, and a collective evolution will help us transcend many of the tensions and delusions that we live with today.
Interesting you should bring this down, because in your book, page 329, you mentioned about the third universal force is the one that preserves the balance between these polarities. This balance, this harmony, that the universe is ever in the process of re-establishing, is called the Tao. And that is what we must seek to align ourselves with. So for me, it just seems like a coincidence that you speak about it and open a page, and the lines that ask me to read it out is the same that you just mentioned. What do you think? But I also heard that you moved, as your journey happened, you moved from one school of, maybe if I can use, school of experience, because you mentioned Tibet, you mentioned Tao, you could mention India, you could mention so many other things. Some people call this as, are you body shopping? Or some people can call that this is maybe you're just opening into experiences. Some people also say maybe this school will help me, this school may help me, this school may, and they go through different experiences. What is your line of thought in this, especially when we're talking about finding this balance and harmony, and alignment within, and not necessarily see that, oh, I have to go here, I have to go here, I have to go here?
Well, I have always believed that when one finds one's teaching in life, you stick with it. That's and when you find your guru, that's it. You've come home, and he'll take you the rest of the journey. And so in my life, I've practiced one tradition, one lineage for 50 years, and I've known this from early on to be just because if you keep shopping around, you're not able to go in deep. You're flitting from here to there. However, in our soul's journey, we've had to have these multiple experiences so that we can see the truth of all the traditions. If you don't actually experience it yourself, then it's just intellectual knowledge. Yeah, I guess all religions are true. I guess all people are equal. I guess this, but if you see yourself in a different body, when I wrote my first book, one of the lives that I experienced, which goes back 3 lifetimes, was a life in Africa. And in that life, it was during the times of slavery, when there was an attack on my village. I was killed, but a son of mine was taken into slavery, brought to America. Now we have this racial tension in this country, and I'm looked upon as a white person, and I say, hey, see who I am. I was an African who was killed. My son was taken into slavery. Give me a break. I know what that's like, because it was a real experience for me. And then after that life in Africa, I was born in the South, in America. So, if you don't have these experiences, we all have these experiences so that we learn what it's like to be in the other body, to be in another religion. And so that we don't judge. We don't think that one race or one religion or one caste is superior, because we've been them all. I've been at the bottom of the rung and the top, everybody is given the full range of experience. That's sort of a given. Don't think that you haven't been at the top and the bottom. And if people knew that, there wouldn't be this arrogance or the mistreatment of people, because you'd remember, yeah, I was there. I know what it's like. And so I think that both are true, that we have, over our soul's journey, we have these multiple experiences so that we can know it all, know the human experience in its entirety, and move beyond judgment, any kind of judgment. And yet, the life that you're born in, you find a path and you stick with it so that you can get to the depth of that practice.
So next line, you kind of said, you will now have Bai's child. It's a story, it's a character. Shu, there is another meaning hidden in this story. What's this meaning? What's the hidden one?
Page is that?
Same, 329, the last paragraph.
To find the context.
Because you go on thereafter to talk about creating a platform to transform negative entities, the feelings, and the sense of victimhood. Primarily the ending of the patterns. So,
yeah.
And then transmuting. You go on to explain that. But for me, this thing about what you mentioned, that you will now have Bai's child, Shu, there is another meaning hidden in this story. What's this hidden meaning, and what is it in the character, or is it something else that you're referring to?
So this part of the book, Shifu, the teacher, is talking about transforming negative energies into beneficial ones. And there are those that can do it at the cosmic level, at the collective level, but it's work each one of us has to do at the individual level. Victimhood, this character had a feeling of being the victim. And as many of us do, if we have, difficulties, some lives bring more difficulties than other lives, then we tend to view ourselves as the victim. And as I've done a lot of peace dialogues in places of conflict around the world, I've seen that this sense of being a victim is a main blockage. Both sides of the conflict feel that they're the victim, and they can't see the suffering of the other side because they're so immersed in their own victimhood. And that's a powerful negative emotion. And it can be subtle. We may perceive ourselves in a relationship as being the victim, if we don't advance in work as being the victim, and that's holding us back. So this is one of the effects of spiritual practice. It helps us, if we are conscious. Spiritual practice can be done in an automatic way. Yeah, we sit to meditate, or it can be done more consciously, where we're really working to transform our negative emotions. And negative emotions can be subtle. jealousy, anger, victimhood, feelings of self-worth, not having self-worth, loss of confidence, all of these things that creep into our consciousness, we have to consciously work to transform into the opposite. So, opposite of selfishness and greed would be generosity. The opposite of pity would be to have compassion. So these have to be conscious efforts. And she was working through a sense of victimhood, which she had carried from those days. I mean, you have to read the story to see, but she was banished, basically sent away because she tried to seduce one of the celibate young men, and that she had fallen in love with. And he was reborn as bi, and she's reborn as Shu, and they have their union and their child, and that is fulfilled. But she still feels a victim because he's a traveling poet who's always gone, and at the demands of society, and he drinks a lot, and he's a drunken poet, and she doesn't have the happiness she thought she would find in this union that she longed for, because after all, he's just a human. And so she's got to do the inner work. And the Shifu, her teacher, directs her toward this and helps her overcome that sense of dissatisfaction and victimhood, and so that she can finally make peace with that relationship.
Beautiful. And coming to probably the second last question, page 416, you started saying, in recalling the life of Sundari, I caught a glimpse of what that age of intuition was like. Has this experience been real for you, or is it an imagination, or is it based on research? What's it like for you?
It's been very real for me, because in addition to my lifelong interest in understanding the law of cause and effect, I've had a lifelong interest in understanding the cycles of time, how the cycles move, the yugas. And I've read everything I could find on the yugas. And particularly because, we can live in Satya Yuga consciousness now. We don't have to wait. The collective humanity goes through this. But I once asked a yogi about the yugas, and he said, in every yuga there are people living in the Satya Yuga, and in every yuga there are people living in the Kali Yuga. It's a state of mind. While it does manifest collectively the type of society, but I've tried to understand this. So I had a peek into what it was like when there was more of a collective consciousness, where you were part of the natural world. There wasn't this consciousness of separation. There wasn't a consciousness of domination. There were no wars. There was no sense of anyone be superior. It wasn't a hierarchical society in those times. There was a sense of everybody being equal, belonging equally, and what one did affected the other. We were a collective. And the sages were respected for their knowledge and looked upon to help guide society, because we knew that they maintained the balance in the natural world. So there was an understanding that the inner state affects the outer. In other words, the climate is affected by our mental state. Collectively, as a humanity, we are affecting the climate. It's not just our pollution, it's our mental state. It's the violence in our mind that's creating the violence against nature, and that's creating the wars that are breaking out. So we have to deal with the violence in our mind. And so it gave me a peek into what this higher state was like. And that was and I haven't lost that. And it is now sort of feeding into the writing of my next book. What is it we're striving? We have to have a vision of where we want to go as a human community. What can we learn from gaining by looking back to seeing a higher age and what life was like then? It was also pre-patriarchal. And this is what led me to write the book on Sita, because the narrative that's come to us commonly in Sita is a patriarchal one. But it was the Treta Yuga. It was pre-patriarchal. there was, so many of the things that are woven into that narrative over time come from a patriarchal mindset. But to get a look at what a pre-patriarchal society was like, the clan that I lived in that time was run by women. It was passed down through the women. And yet there were no sense that women were superior. That's just the way it was, because the women knew how to take care of the family, and the clan was the family. So it was a very natural thing for the woman to be the caretaker of the clan. And she worked with the sage, who happened to be a man at that time. She intuitively received the knowledge from him when she'd go in the mornings to sit in meditation with the sage, who was always in meditation. She received guidance from him, and that's how she knew how to lead the clan. And it was he who guided her to lead the clan out of the forest, because a new society was developing along the rivers. So it gave me insight into where we need to go in the future. And so I think all of us need to sort of try to strive for that Satya Yuga mentality of living in balance with the Dharma, with Dharma and with all of the natural laws and worlds, and overcoming our own negative tendencies, which are built up through our life experiences and are understandable. If we've had a few lives where we've had a rough time, or we've been without, of course we're going to want more things, and greed might creep in. I look at the people, the billionaires who have so much, and I say, wow, they must have really been deprived in their past. That they can't see beyond their own need to have more than it could take you 100 lifetimes to use, So it changes your perception of the world. And I think keeping a little bit of what that Satya Yuga time was like, even though we can only get a peek. We can't fully understand. Our mind may not be there yet, but we can peer into it and try to live that kind of life today.
I promise this is the last question. How do you envision the relationship between personal memories and the collective human experience?
That's a very important question. It's something that I've thought about a lot, because in my work at the Global Peace Initiative, I've tried to understand collective karma. I after years of working with my own memories, I understand a little bit of how I've gotten to where I am. But when I sat with the Palestinian and Israeli women and see the knots and say, how do you untangle this? It's beyond what I can understand. And I've gone to many conflict places to see what is locking them in this conflict. And of course, everybody brings, and here in America, when we're having our own conflict, it's like this is a collective. So you're born in a certain place because you have a relationship with that collective. And it's something that's preoccupying me at the moment. I can't say that I have an answer. There is definitely a relationship. You're born in the place you are because of your karmic relationship with the karma that's unfolding there. So nothing is by accident. So I say, we're having a lot of racial tensions in this country. What can my experience and my awakening of those memories add to this collective healing that needs to take place? We need to move beyond seeing the other person as being white or black. We need to move beyond seeing racial differences, because we've and I think that in the future there'll be much greater acceptance of this, of the fact. I think scientifically we will know that that this is true, that rebirth just happens. That's the way things work. And once you know that, well, you have to come to the conclusion, well, you're not born in the same religion and the same gender and the same everything every time. That wouldn't serve you. So I think that the challenge before us is moving beyond these, I call it the domination gene. One religion, one gender, one race, one economic group is superior or has more power than the other. To progress as a human community, we have to outgrow that mindset, and which means that we each have to do it individually, because there's a certain trigger. What is it? 1%. If 1% of the human community achieves that realization, then it will have an effect throughout. I don't know exactly what the percent is. It's like the 100th monkey, but it's not. It's not a huge percent. And so we each have to work with the karma of the collective into which we're born, and then we have the earth karma that we're part of as well. So, we have our individual karma, we have our family karma, we have our national karma, we have the earth karma. So it all feeds into the other. So we begin with the individual. If you know what your issues are, and it takes sort of like objective reflection, because it's easy for the mind to overlook certain things, and we have to be honest with ourselves. What is it we want to outgrow in this life? What do we want to become? We want to become like Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, obviously, right? We want to be like that. So what do we need to chisel away? What do we need to work on to become like that? And that will affect, in terms of the collective karma, there's the Auroville karma. Auroville's a collective. It's like a little or a big family. You say a big family or a small nation. And so each individual is bringing their issues to that collective. And I think it's a long process. It's not something, a few years we'll solve this. It's a process. Evolution is a process. Awakening is a process. But the more we work on our own spiritual sadhana, the more we facilitate that process.
Thank you, Dana. This is, for me personally, has been a most beautiful conversation. Because somewhere I find there's a reflection and there's a parallel journey out there. I'm just going to see if somebody in the audience have a question. Do you have a question?
Yeah. I'm curious about her process of tapping into the past memories. Whether, to do it consistently, to be able to write a book, I think she has to have some process. So I'm interested in that.
So the question is that one of them is very curious about the process that you follow into tapping of your past memories, is that it? Because to be so consistent at it and to write about it, what's the process that you follow, if I understand the question rightly? Or what is it that you do or follow?
I know, but when you do some meditative practices...
It's hard for me to describe the process. All I can say is that I really attribute it to my meditation, because these memories, I often find myself in meditation, which is not an ideal thing. You're not supposed to go back into the past in meditation, but I often do. I often find these memories. Something happens during my meditation process, and I do Kriya Yoga, which works with Kundalini energy, with the prana in the spine, and so where are these memories stored? They're stored somewhere in our astral body, perhaps the astral spine, somewhere. They're stored in a certain place. I don't know that it's actually a location, but they're stored somewhere. And I think doing spiritual practices can stir these seeds of memories. And I jot notes down. I have pads by my bed, by my meditation chair, all over the house. I have pads, and so if I hear something or see something, I write it down. And then I'm pretty disciplined in my writing. I write most mornings for a period of time. It can vary. If I'm not seeing or hearing anything, I don't press it. I just wait. And there are times when I've had to wait until I see the next scene, the next thing comes to me. So I would say it's in part due to my spiritual sadhana and the discipline that I've developed. I think that one has to be disciplined in whatever one's doing. And so I even if I'm just writing a few paragraphs that day, or reading over what I've written the day before and refining it, I go over and over my work. I do a lot of editing. So first, I just get it out. I get out the story. And then I go back and refine it and edit it, where I'm really sort of playing with the language, trying to be more descriptive. I mean, my goal is to help draw people into that time, into that space. So in the book I just finished about 12th century Tibet, I knew the story. I knew what was unfolding, and so I wrote that down. But I wanted people to go back to that time in Tibet, to be in dialogue with the people there. And again, the Devi of the Moon plays a prominent role there. And so I rewrote, and we were giving more descriptive language, so that the characters could come alive. So the process is, first I see, then I write, then I refine.
Thank you.
So this is a question that just came into my mind. So one is, there is a personal experience, right? You experience a certain memory. And then there is the process of writing it down. And like you said about, actually going back to the time in Tibet and really seeing the context of what's the dialoguing. So is there an element of research? How do you balance a personal experience and a research? And is there something that's also coming from an inner need of saying some message? Because you are still one there, there is your experience, there is something from the outside, and there is my own need probably to say something, so how does one, really integrate these spaces and bring that out in a way you retain your authenticity of your experience, and yet something for the audience, or something that comes in the form of a book?
Yes, that's, Sudha, you have asked all the right questions, all important but difficult questions. And I can speak a little bit by my recent book, To Dance with Dakinis, In Search of Self. I say at the beginning of the book that these are my personal experiences. I can only write from personal experience. These are my personal experiences. However, I do employ poetic license. So in that book, I wanted people to understand something of the history of Tibet. Tibet was once a great empire. So I actually read quite a few books on the history of Tibet, because what I see is my own personal journey through that land. But I wanted to give the context, to put the time I was born, the 12th century, into the context of what was happening in that part of the world. It was the time when Nalanda was destroyed in India. So I did a little research into that. Well, what was going on there? There were 5 great learning centers. They were all destroyed at that time. The second part of the book takes place right after the life in Tibet, a life in India, in the north of India, during a time of great destruction. So again, just like The Bright Moon Rises is China and India, this book is Tibet and India. And at a time of a lot of instability in the world, in that part of, well, all over the world. So I do the research to put what I'm seeing in context. And it was the same thing in When the Bright Moon Rises. There was that rebellion that took place. I knew there was some war going on, but I didn't remember all the details of the war. And so I did research into the Lushan rebellion to know, well, how many people were killed? What happened at that time? What was the cause of it? And I wove that into the narrative. So I'm a great student of history. I think that we can learn a lot from history. I've always been a lover of history. And so I put my books into the historical context by describing the historical events of that part of the world at that time. So yes, I do research, but I do it after I've got the narrative down, sort of when I'm doing the editing and refining, so that the time and place can come alive for people. People can actually experience what was going on. What was 12th century Tibet like? What was 8th century China like? What was, I didn't do research on Vedic India because there's not much to find. I had to just rely on what I was seeing. But I am a researcher. That sort of complements my intuitive, poetic faculty.
Thank you. Any other questions?
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Dina, thank you for this session. I have read your book, When the Bright Moon Also Rises. and I come from China. I'm staying in Auroville as a resident. I do see that your message and your experiences is very, very kind of key to unlocking the tensions that have been there building up in the world that is out there, but also is being felt inside of us, in Auroville as well. And so you are also writing a book on the future. So, and then you are within China, India, and Tibet, and you live in America. And then there is a world forward. So what is the kind of essential message that your life and your books are weaving together, and that you would really like the world to know and experience for themselves?
Did you get that question, Dana?
I didn't hear.
Okay. So I'm just going to try and summarize. Anandi, just be with me if So Anandi is an Aurovillian here. She's from China. And she feels that you have through your books, you have a very important message. And in your books, you mentioned about India, China, Tibet, and you also mentioned about future. And in the fact that we're living in the context of Auroville, which is an inside, outside, outside, inside kind of a work we're doing. So she wanted to understand what's your essential message for all of us, and especially in the times that we are finding ourselves in today at Auroville. Is that your question? And in a way, how this could also be then shared with the outside world? Shared and experienced by the other people. So that's her question.
So I think one of the phenomena that is manifesting around the
one
world
sec. She
now
also,
is
sorry, she mentioned about that India, China, Tibet, but you live in US, so there's quite a bit of a world experience that is also happening. Yeah, sorry.
Well, my past. I mean, I've had past in many places, but the past that's influenced me, and then some lives are more impactful than others. There's some lives where we just sort of like, muddle along, and then those that have a great impact. And I tend to write about those that have created an important imprint on me. And so we are becoming one world, and so I think it's one of the messages is to bring our collective experiences where we've lived in all these different places into what do we need to do now. And I think, as I said, polarization is manifesting all over the world, including Auroville, to be honest. And I think we each have to work to counter this by not allowing ourselves to be angry at the other, to demean the other, but to try to understand the other. I mean, we're struggling with this here in the U.S. How do we get past the moment that we're in, where people are dividing into camps? Well, it's not to be in a camp. It's to be above the camps, and to hold the vision and the commitment to unity, to human unity, to unity within our locality, our country, our whatever, wherever we are, to hold the vision of unity and to overcome whatever we need to overcome to do that. Anger arises. Well, that's an individual thing. Where's that anger coming from? If there's anger, it's a personal thing we have to deal with. There was one of the Buddhist teachers who we brought to the conference in February, said, as long as you're blaming something external, you've got more work to do. Well, that's a very powerful statement. As long as you're blaming the external, you've got more work to do. And let's all reflect on that, because that external is triggering an anger that's in you. And so that anger might be from something else, but there's still that residue of anger that's left in you. We want to get to the place where there's no residue of anger. And then, of course, there's that thought of righteous anger, right? Of anger at injustice. Well, I don't believe anger at justice is anger. I look at it as compassion. Because you're wanting to defend those who've been unjustly treated. That's compassion. And if you have no judgment, if you move beyond judgment, then there's no judgment. You're responding to the suffering, but not from a place of judgment. There's no blame. And I think that's an ideal. Certainly it's an ideal that I've set for myself, to get beyond the place of blame, beyond the place of judgment, the place of where we can hold the unity despite different experiences, different opinions, and not get caught into a polarizing situation. That's one of the challenges of the world right now. And it's a difficult one. I'm not saying it's easy. It's certainly a difficult one. And so the message, I mean, if that's one of the message that comes through in all my books is that of striving for this state of love. And the book that I'm working on now is called Memories of a Future Life, Becoming Love. That's what we hold in front of us. That's where we want to get to. And there are a few steps needed to get to that place. Well, I'm sort of like committed to doing whatever it takes to get to that place. That's where I want to be, you know? And I think we all need to, but this is why I don't encourage people to go back into the past unless something arises organically. If something arises organically, there's a purpose for that. And so I follow what arises organically for me because I know that there's a deeper teaching for me and perhaps there's a reason for me to be sharing it with others. I've had such a wonderful response that I feel gratified that I'm able to share this, my past experiences with others. But basically, it's the future now. You know, we have to collectively, and Auroville has an important role to play in that because Sri Aurobindo, the mother, created this collective for a purpose. And I believe it was helping to shape the vision for the future, a vision that will manifest. And as I said earlier, we don't know the time frame. Auroville might be one stepping stone in getting to that place. But we have a choice whether it's going to be a stepping stone that's closer or a stepping stone that still has a lot of churning to do. So let's get through the churning where we can hold that place of unity and get beyond judgment and anger and polarization and blame. And awaken greater compassion so that we can let the love flow through us.
So
Does that answer the question?
Sorry, yeah.
Yes, you know, please also mention that I have read her book, and I have also had this feeling that I have been living in different places, you know, including India as well.
Yeah, so Anandi specifically wanted you to know that she has read a book, your book, and that she has similar experiences all living across different geographic areas, which includes India, Tibet, and China. And she is presently from China, but in Auroville.
I think we've been in touch, and maybe Anandi will meet when I come in February.
Done, Dana. You have a question, Isha?
No.
No.
Actually, I resonate a lot with what I heard from you because I had also several past lives that came back to me, and particularly one last in China. That's why I'm so connected with Anandi, because when I am with Anandi, I feel myself back to that, and it's only when I went to China that I could make peace with this life.
Yeah,
And
so this is Isha here. Isha is also an Aurovillian, and she offers different kinds of tea ceremonies, and it's quite a spiritual experience. I've been in one of her sessions, so what she was just sharing was that she resonates with whatever you have shared, and she has had one previous experience of being in China, and only when she went there, she kind of had a certain experience of peace with her herself or what she was experiencing, and that she resonates a lot with Anandi. So she was just sharing that experience for your benefit.
Well, thank you. I'm actually very grateful that my memories of China awakened because I felt a deep, again, obviously now a deep connection to the culture, and I can look beyond superficial things, and I know that awakening is underway in China. In a way, we have to live in the consciousness of the future, of what will be. And there are many positive developments awaiting for us all.
So Isha was just sharing was that you mentioned about polarization, and one of the connections she has is a vertical connection. And in that connection, you cannot really differentiate between your left hand and your right hand. And in the process of discovering of who am I, can I really even judge anything? Can I even pass a judgment about anything and everything around me? She just wanted to probably just express a statement in that sense.
Yes, just to...
That's true.
Yeah.
We can't really pass a judgment because we don't know the history. We don't know what led to that moment. We can't. There is no judgment. And in the universal sense, I mean, there is no judgment. I mean, that was a great learning for me, that nobody's judging us, and so we shouldn't judge ourselves or others.
Well, I love that line. Nobody's judging us, but at least we're not judging ourselves, and therefore not the others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. I think it's just been beautiful having this conversation of how personal memories can be tied into a collective human experience and healing, and how you have used your own personal experiences into being able to give a message for the audience of how important it is to continue to do the inner work. And as long as we are committed to the inner work, there is always something that will happen on the outside. And the whole idea of bringing in the age of intuition, and the intuition is where there is that sense of oneness, not just within, but also everything around us. So thank you for really being a beautiful channel of transcending your personal awakenings of all the ancient memories into really being able to see their purpose, the need to work, and especially seeing through patterns and emotions. And we are definitely looking forward to your book, The Future Life, and the theme of becoming love, or being love, or just being love. So thank you so much, Dana, and I truly, truly cherish this, especially as part of our closing session of the Auroville LitFest, where as part of the theme we were wanting to bring is the G20 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, the importance of working as not just individual but collective for human peace and unity, and at Unity Pavilion. So really grateful, and it's been a beautiful conversation, and I hope we can have more of this and more of the conversations channeled through you for the benefit of human mankind. Deeply grateful.
Thank you, Sudha. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I look forward to seeing you all in February.
Yes, look
you.
forward to seeing you in February. Thank you so much, Dana.